Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima, and I'd just like to talk to you for a little bit about Speed Limit. I was really looking forward to this, because it was arguably my #1 highlight of the second Steam Game Festival, because of its unique concept, constantly changing gameplay, and just general suaveness about the whole thing, how smoothly it changes between things, all the little things that it has going for it when it comes to little details, like in the car stage in particular, if you hear a horn coming towards you, that means that there's a car coming your way even if you can't see it, which is a nice touch, but if you've got a good pair of headphones on, you can hear exactly where the car is. So if you find yourself just a little bit off to the left of the car, you know that you can go straight off to the left and you'll be fine. There's all sorts of those little bits of gameplay and little tweaks to make it just really satisfying, at least for the first 9 stages, but we'll get to that. The controls are really simple. It's always like the left analog stick, the right trigger to fire, and the B button will usually do some kind of special feature, whether it be some flares, or whether it be your jump when you're in the, whatchamacallit, you jump when you're on foot, or in the helicopter, you fire off a missile. There's always something neat that it does, even if it doesn't affect the gameplay sometimes. So it's a really simple game, and it's also quite difficult if you couldn't tell by the fact that I'm consistently dying over and over, because it is quite difficult. One hit from pretty much anything kills you in this game, so you need to be really goddamn on your toes to survive longer than a few seconds, but thankfully, this difficulty is balanced out by a couple of things. The main thing being that checkpoints are not only frequent, but getting back into the action is almost faster than bloody Hotline Miami. You're back in it so quick that sometimes it can be kinda hard to tell you died, especially if you get into one of the checkpoints right before you do die, because thankfully, in most situations, he says, with the stress level rising in his voice, the game actually has a lot of checkpoints. You'll have at least 2 checkpoints per stage, sometimes 3, but either way, you will be back in it and you will be quite close to where you were to begin with, so that works fine by me. And a little bit of praise has to be heaped on the game's graphical details as well, because, man, it looks pretty basic, right? It looks relatively simple, but then it goes into a transition where you end up hopping into a bloody fighter jet, or you end up jumping from a bike into a car. The bike looks like Outrun, and then next thing you know, you hop into the chopper, and it turns into a game of Zaxxon. And it just looks great. It legitimately looks great when the transition happens, and the only thing that it's really spoiled by is immediately dying in the new control scheme because you don't really know what you're doing. It's a bit weird because the game actually gave you a fair amount of extra content. Not extra content, content in the demo that I played, because it's really short. I played this for about half an hour and I was already up to the final boss. It is quite short. And the demo content gave you like the first 3 stages, and that half hour I just talked about is 9 stages. So while the game is $10 US, you'll get about an hour out of it if you just want to go through the main game once. And I say an hour because while the first 9 stages aren't massively difficult to the point where you'll have to be playing them for 10 minutes straight the whole time, the final boss is a massive jump in difficulty. And not only that, it kind of goes against some of the game's principles that it's tried to teach you up to this point. And it's honestly really frustrating, because if it wasn't for this final boss being as retarded as it is, I probably would have given this an almost perfect score. But the final boss is just a thing all on its own. First thing to note, everything instantly kills you, except for one attack, which for some reason, unless you take a full brunt of it to the face, doesn't instantly kill you. So it's weird. It gives you the opportunity to live through it, but not by much. And the second thing is that it doesn't have any checkpoints. Unlike the entire rest of the game, where if you make a decent amount of progress, you'll get a checkpoint. But in this one, you have to beat the entire final boss in one go. And the downside is that the final boss is really hard, even by this game's standards. It has several attacks, a lot of which you won't be able to see coming until you die to them, because they're just that fast. And there's a couple that just go against the entirety of what the game is made up to this point, because in this game, all the attacks have always come at you from the same plane, whether it be cars on the road, motorbikers coming up beside you to take a shot. In Zaxxon, it can be a little bit difficult because you need to be more looking at the shadow of your helicopter in order to make sure that you don't run yourself straight into a bridge or whatever, but it's still relatively reasonably on the same plane as you. But the Harrier jet sections that you get towards the end of the game introduce the ability to go in and out of the screen by speeding up and slowing down. This is also a functionality that you have in this game, just notably that it'll work on the same plane. But on the Harrier ones, you actually move into the screen and then move away from the screen, adding a sort of 3D element to the whole game that the rest of the stages didn't have up to this point. I mean, there was the outrun style stages, but there was so little to worry about when it came to them. Like, you had the cars that would come up to you on the same thing, the bikes that would shoot at you from the left and right. Those are all reasonable, those are all fine. The final boss has several attacks, for that matter, where you have to be not only actively speeding up and slowing down, but you have to be doing it in a very specific way. And let me tell you something about the way this game controls. I was playing this on a DualSense, which has both a D-pad and an analog stick, and neither of them were particularly great for this particular game, because you not only need to be speeding up and slowing down at exactly the same time, but you'll also need to be going left and right. So if you play this on the D-pad, you have to hold the D-pad in some surprisingly uncomfortable ways very quickly. You need to be going like down right and then up left, and then just constantly swapping back and forth between directions. But if you play on an analog stick, you have the ability to accidentally trigger a slowdown or a speed up to the point where it might get you killed. So unless you got something with a really nice arcade stick, it might be a little bit difficult to recommend, or possibly play it on mouse and keyboard. Although you'd probably just end up playing it entirely on keyboard, but whatever, that's not what I'm talking about here. I played it on controller. So the thing is, with the particular boss's attacks that I'm talking about, it will often force you to come in and then turn in a specific direction, or go out and turn in a specific direction. And the one in particular that really pisses me off, and is the one that I died to the most by far, is that it's got this laser cannon, and when it fires, just spots on the screen become dead zones. So even if you're like really far away, in a way that there's no way that this plane would realistically be able to hit you, it will still hit you. And it still drives me goddamn insane, because it just breaks the rules that the game has set up to this point, where you go from having a reasonable set of attacks that would come in a realistic way, to an attack that just covers parts of the screen. No matter how far away or close you are to this plane, it's going to hit you anyway. I'm just having massive trouble just imagining how this attack would work in real life. And it's just, it tripped me up so much, because you have to do this really specific, come on in to get the laser to track you, and then fly backwards in order to get the lasers away from where you are on screen. And it is really hard to do, no matter whether you're playing on analog stick or D-pad. And it is just infuriating. So the final boss is extremely hard, to the point where I spent the same amount of time that I did getting up to the final boss as I did fighting the final boss, and I still couldn't beat it, despite the fact that each life lasts like a minute. It's too damn hard. That's all I've got to say, it's too damn hard. I played this game on the normal difficulty. Just FYI, I don't know where I was going with that. But I played this game on the normal difficulty, and everything up to that point was a reasonable challenge with a decent difficulty curve. It never got too hard too fast, until the final boss, where it becomes next to impossible. And it legitimately drives me nuts. There are also some other features you can unlock. There is the ability to enter the Konami code in the main menu. You can get a endless mode after you beat the game, which just sends you through multiple loops, and you need to survive 2 in order to get an achievement by the looks of it. And there are some unique mid-stage challenges, like you will need to hit every single shot on stage 1, which is entirely doable, I believe that. Or stage 9, where you have to shoot down 5 enemy pilots in 1 life. It's doable. Stage 10 is still really goddamn frustrating though. to the point where I find it surprisingly hard to recommend Speed Limit. Because it was such a smooth and really well done experience before that point, only to kind of trip over the worst parts of the games that it's meant to be imitating from the ZX Spectrum, from old NES titles that would often do the same thing, just be constantly swapping positions, game styles, what have you. And as a result, I can't help but come away disappointed. I'm not going to refund it, because I've only put an hour into it, but I gotta tell you, man, that final boss really did just bring an end to my enjoyment of the game. And I'm kind of depressed as a result. That's pretty much all I've got to say. It's a really simple game. It only lasts an hour if you actually somehow manage to figure out the final boss. So, yeah. Not something I'd recommend outright. Maybe get it when it's on sale, or hopefully the developer will see that the final boss is just too much of a difficulty spike and he'll tone it down a bit. I'll let you watch a little bit more footage. This has been Bully Maxima. I'll see you all next time.